The air in the warehouse was heavy, thick with the scent of new cardboard and the oppressive silence that only exists in places filled with things, but devoid of people. It was in this silence that an almost imperceptible sound cut through the atmosphere, a suppressed sob. Lewis Wilson, who that day was merely James Silva, a middle-aged, newly hired employee, stopped with a box in his hands. He frowned, the disguise of a baseball cap and cheap reading glasses failing to hide the concern in his eyes. He followed the sound, passing by metal shelves that stretched to the ceiling packed with cutting-edge electronics, and then he saw him. Huddled between a pile of boxes and the cold concrete wall was Miguel Correa. The young man was swaying gently back and forth, a rhythmic, self-soothing motion. His hands covered his face and his shoulders trembled with each silent cry. At his feet, shattered on the floor, lay an old circuit board, its delicate components scattered like the remnants of a broken dream. The image was desolate, an island of suffering in an ocean of merchandise. Louis felt a lump form in his throat. He owned all of this, the store, the boxes, the brand. But in that moment, he knew nothing about the pain that existed within his own walls. And as he looked at the crying young man, a terrible question began to form in his mind. What could have happened here? Where are you watching this story from today? Wherever you are, know that sometimes the truth is hidden right under our noses. Subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one, revealing what happens when we decide to look closer. Lewis Wilson's decision to become James Silva wasn't born of impulse, but of a disquiet that had been consuming him for months. As CEO and founder of Autistic, an electronics retail giant, he spent his days in glass-walled meeting rooms, analyzing spreadsheets and profit projections. He read reports, hundreds of them, and one in particular about the exemplary organizational culture of his flagship store left him with an uneasy feeling. The report, signed by regional manager Alexander Garnier, was a poem of praise for a store manager named Theodore Hassan Kalik. Theodore was described as an inspiring leader who had fostered a family environment and achieved record-breaking efficiency targets. The store was a model, but the words seemed too polished, too perfect. Lewis knew the corporate world well enough to know that perfection usually hid something. The disquiet deepened when he remembered his younger brother, who had passed away too soon. His brother was autistic, a genius with numbers and patterns, but whom the world insisted on seeing as broken. He remembered his struggle to find a job where he was understood, not just tolerated. Every report about a family culture made Lewis wonder if Autistic was truly a place where his brother would have thrived, or just another company with good marketing speak. So he made a drastic decision. He created the identity of James Silva, a man in his early 50s, widowed, looking for a second chance in the job market. With dyed gray hair, reading glasses, and simple clothes, he became invisible. No one would look twice at him. He wanted to see his company not from the top, but from the ground up. He wanted to smell the warehouse, hear the conversations in the break room, see the truth without the filter of corporate reports. On his first day, the store looked exactly as described, bright, organized, with smiling employees. Theodore Hassan Chelik greeted him with a firm handshake and a charismatic smile. "Welcome to the family, James," he said. And for a moment, Louis almost believed him. That's when he first saw Miguel Correa. The young man moved through the store floor with quiet precision, organizing products on the shelves with an almost artistic symmetry. He didn't speak to anyone, his headphones seeming like a barrier to the world. Louis watched him for a while. There was an intensity to Miguel's concentration that was mesmerizing. He wasn't just arranging boxes, he was creating order out of chaos. Theodore approached Louis, following his gaze. "Ah, Miguel," he said in a low voice, his tone mixing condescension with false pride. "He's part of our inclusion program. A bit peculiar, but great with inventory. Keeps things in line." The word peculiar hit Louis like a small stone. It was the same word people used to describe his brother. On that first day, Louis, as James, was assigned to the warehouse. And there he saw Miguel's true talent. The organization system wasn't the company's standard. It was better, more intuitive, faster. Every item had a logical place, based not just on product code, but on its sales frequency, its relation to other items. It was a living, breathing system, ingenious in its simplicity. It was obvious to Louis that this hadn't been created by a manager focused on metrics, but by a mind that saw patterns no one else did. Miguel's mind. That day, Louis felt a pang of pride. Perhaps the reports were right. Perhaps Autistic was indeed a place that valued unique talents. Little did he know he was only scratching the surface of a much darker truth. In the following days, Louis, in the guise of James, tried to get closer to Miguel. The task proved challenging. Miguel was a closed universe. He avoided eye contact, responded with monosyllables, and spent most of his time immersed in his work or listening to music through his headphones. Louis didn't push. He remembered how his brother needed space and interactions on his own terms. So, he just observed and worked alongside him in silence, offering a calm, expectation-free presence. The first crack in Miguel's wall appeared unexpectedly. Louis noticed that during break time, Miguel didn't go to the break room with the others. Instead, he'd sit in a quiet corner of the warehouse with a tablet, looking at images of old computers, those beige boxes from the 80s and 90s. The young man's face, usually expressionless, would soften, almost light up. It was his special interest. The next day, Louis casually mentioned, as they were organizing a shelf, that his first computer had been an old model, with a 16-bit processor. For the first time, Miguel took off his headphones and looked directly at him. "The Intel 80286 processor?" he asked, his voice surprisingly clear. "Exactly," Louis replied, smiling. And then, it happened. Like a dam breaking, Miguel started talking. He spoke about motherboard architecture, the beauty of DOS's simplicity, how each component had a clear, honest function. His passion was palpable, his expertise undeniable. For 10 minutes, he wasn't the peculiar employee. He was an expert, a historian of technology. Louis listened, fascinated. In that brief moment of connection, he felt a surge of hope. Perhaps he was wrong about Theodore. Perhaps the manager had genuinely seen Miguel's potential and given him a space to flourish. Hope, however, was fragile and short-lived. The illusion began to crumble that very afternoon. Theodore gathered the team on the store floor for an announcement. He publicly praised Miguel's work on inventory. "Thanks to Miguel's dedication, we've hit a new record for stock accuracy." "A round of applause for him," Theodore exclaimed, his smile wide and performative. The employees applauded. Miguel seemed to shrink under the attention, looking at the floor. Uncomfortable. Louis felt his stomach churn. The praise felt hollow, a tool to polish Theodore's own image as an inclusive manager. Confirmation came minutes later, in the warehouse. Theodore cornered Miguel near the loading dock. "Listen here," he hissed, the smile completely gone. "I praise you out there, and you make me look like an idiot. A customer asked for help, and you just stood there staring into space. What's your problem? You need to be more normal." Miguel didn't respond, just fixed, his gaze on a spot on the wall, his hands beginning to flutter slightly at his sides. "Stop that," Theodore ordered, referring to Miguel's stimming. "You embarrass me." He turned and walked away, leaving Miguel trembling and pale. Louis, who had witnessed it all from a distance, felt his blood boil. This wasn't a manager trying to help. This was an abuser. Later, he saw Theodore talking to another employee, cruelly imitating Miguel's hand flapping and laughing. The other employee laughed along, uncomfortably. Louis sought out the gaze of a colleague, Eva Carvalho, who had also seen the scene. She met his eyes for a second, her face a mask of fear and shame, before looking away and hurrying back to work. In that moment, the false hope dissolved like smoke. The family culture was a facade. The model store was a stage. And Theodore Hassan Chelik was not a leader. He was a tyrant, and his primary target was the most vulnerable member of his team. Louis realized the situation was far worse than he had imagined. The rot wasn't in the reports. It was right there, on the store floor, hidden behind fake smiles and efficiency targets. With each passing day, Louis's disguise grew heavier, a shroud of impotence. He was a king dressed as a commoner, forced to watch his own kingdom being poisoned, unable to act without breaking the spell. Theodore's behavior towards Miguel wasn't just cruel, it was sadistic and systematic. It was a game of psychological power, played on a field where only one of the players knew the rules. One morning, Louis arrived to find the warehouse, Miguel's sanctuary of order, in complete chaos. Boxes out of place, products mixed up, the perfect system undone. Miguel stood in the middle of the disarray, paralyzed, his breathing shallow. Theodore walked past him, giving a friendly pat on his shoulder. "Oops, looks like the night crew made a mess. Can you get this sorted for us by lunchtime, champ?" he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. It was an obvious lie. The night crew never touched Miguel's system. Theodore had done this on purpose, destroying the only thing that gave Miguel a sense of control and security, just to watch him suffer. Louis spent the morning helping Miguel rebuild his order, piece by piece. The young man didn't say a word, but the tension in his shoulders and the tremor in his hands spoke volumes. On another occasion, Theodore assigned Miguel a task he knew to be a sensory trigger: cleaning the noisy, steamy espresso machine in the break area, precisely at 1 p.m., the store's peak lunch hour. The small space filled with loud conversations, laughter, and the incessant din of the machine. Louis watched from a distance as Miguel, his face pale and sweating, tried to focus on the task, his shoulders hunched as if protecting himself from physical blows. He ended up knocking over a container of coffee beans, which spilled across the floor. Theodore, conveniently nearby, sighed loudly, a theatrical sound of exasperation. "Seriously, Miguel? That was a simple task," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I try to give you responsibilities, get you out of your comfort zone, but you just won't cooperate." He turned to the other employees. "See what I have to put up with, but it's for his own good, so he learns to deal with the real world." The phrase "for his own good" was poison disguised as medicine. Theodore wasn't building character. He was breaking a spirit, and he did it under the guise of benevolent mentorship. Louis' breaking point came during a silent conversation in the break room. He sat down at Eva Carvalho's table, the employee who always seemed frightened. She ate her salad listlessly, her eyes fixed on her plate. For a long time, they said nothing. Then Louis spoke, his voice low and calm. "This isn't right, what he does to Miguel." Eva flinched, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Don't get involved, James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Theodore, he can make your life hell. He's already doing that to Miguel's life," Louis replied. Eva put down her fork. A tear traced a path down her cheek, and then she unburdened herself. The truth was far worse than mere cruelty. "It's not just the bullying," she said, her voice choked. "It's theft. That inventory system, the one that earned Theodore a huge bonus and a nomination for regional manager. It's not his." Louis's heart sank. "It's Miguel's, isn't it?" Eva nodded. "Miguel spent months developing it. He kept notes in notebooks, drew diagrams. He showed me once, he was so proud. He said it would make everyone's job easier. Theodore saw the notebooks, praised him, said he'd present the idea to management on Miguel's behalf. And then, he presented it as his own. Miguel didn't quite understand what happened. He just got confused when everyone congratulated Theodore. The revelation was a punch to Louis's gut. This wasn't just about abuse. It was exploitation of the worst kind. Theodore was stealing the genius of a man he pretended to help, building his career on the brilliant mind he simultaneously tortured. "And the circuit board?" Louis asked, remembering the scene that had brought him here. The image of Miguel crying in the warehouse. Eva's eyes filled with fresh tears. "That board? It was from an old computer Miguel's father gave him. He was restoring it. It was his treasure. Yesterday, Miguel couldn't handle a loud, sudden announcement over the store's PA system. He had a little overload, needed a minute in the warehouse. Theodore went after him and said he was making a scene. He saw the board on Miguel's workbench and knocked it to the floor. Said it was an accident." Louis closed his eyes. The picture was now complete. The cruelty, the exploitation, the theft. Theodore wasn't just a bad manager. He was a monster who preyed on the vulnerability of others. In that moment, James Silva, the meek employee, died, and Louis Wilson, the CEO, the founder, the man who built Aura Tech on a dream of innovation and respect, was reborn with a cold, calculated fury. The secret investigation was over. It was time for war. That night, Louis Wilson's apartment transformed into a war room. The James Silva persona was shed, along with the cheap uniform and the cap. Seated before 3 monitors, Louis was no longer a low-level employee, but the commander of a digital empire, and he was about to wield its full power. With a few keystrokes, he unlocked the doors to Autistic's servers. First, he pulled up Theodore Hassan Silik's file. There it was. The glowing performance review, the substantial bonus, the recommendation for promotion signed by Alexander Garnier, and attached, the dynamic inventory system project, with Theodore's name on every page. Then, Louis dove into the email records. He found the message exchange where Theodore presented the project to regional management. An idea I had one sleepless night, he wrote. I believe it can revolutionize our logistics. The lie was so brazen it was suffocating. The true masterstroke, however, came from the security system. Theodore had access to the store and warehouse floor cameras, but he didn't know that the CEO had a master access, a God's eye that saw everything, including the logs of who watched and deleted footage. Louis began to sift through the files of the past few weeks. He found it all. The warehouse camera captured the moment. Theodore, thinking no one was looking, took Miguel's notebooks and photographed them with his phone. He found the scene where he deliberately messed up the shelves, looking directly at the camera with a smug smile, unaware his act of vandalism was being archived on a secure server. And then, the most damning of all, the video from the previous day. The corner camera captured the entire scene. The loud announcement, Miguel retreating to the warehouse, visibly distressed, Theodore following him, the one-sided argument, and the final act. Theodore's hand accidentally sweeping Miguel's precious circuit board off the workbench, the sound of its shattering captured by the camera's sensitive microphone. He even saw Theodore deleting the log of that video segment from his own access log, believing he had eliminated the evidence. But he didn't know that the system created an automatic, untouchable backup to the main server. Louis saved all the files onto an encrypted drive. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. He glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. He picked up his phone and dialed Bianca Thomas, Autistic's global head of human resources. She answered on the second ring, her voice sleepy. Louis, is something wrong? Everything's wrong, Bianca, he said, his voice calm but laced with icy intensity. Cancel your schedule for tomorrow. I want you at our flagship store at 11 a.m. No questions, just be there. He hung up before she could reply. The second call was to Alexander Garnier, the regional manager who had signed the glowing report. Alexander, it's Louis Wilson. Tomorrow at 11:15, you will conduct a surprise performance audit at Mr. Silik's store. He must not know I'm involved. Just say it's routine. I want your honest assessment of his leadership in real time. Alexander, taken aback, stammered a confirmation. The stage was set. The trap was sprung. Louis didn't just want to fire Theodore. That would be too easy. He wanted to dismantle him. He wanted the same audience that had witnessed his false benevolence to witness his true nature. He wanted the humiliation to be public, total, and unforgettable. Before finally shutting down the monitors, he did one last online search, looking for vintage tech parts sellers. He found what he needed and placed an order with express delivery for the next morning. Revenge would be dessert, but justice had to come first. The next morning, Louis arrived for his last day as James Silva. The air in the store was thick with the usual tension. Theodore strutted across the sales floor, adjusting a display here, barking an order there, the petty king in his petty fiefdom. Louis found Miguel in the warehouse. The young man was quieter than usual, his energy depleted like a light bulb with low voltage. He was mechanically sweeping up the remnants of his broken circuit board, each movement slow and painful. Louis approached silently and placed a small cardboard box on the workbench beside him. Miguel stopped sweeping and looked at the box, then at James with suspicion. I found this online, Louis said softly. It's not the same, I know, but I thought, maybe you could use it. Miguel hesitantly opened the box. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a circuit board identical to the one that had been destroyed, perfectly preserved. It was a collector's item, rare, and in pristine condition. Miguel's eyes widened. He picked up the board with reverent delicacy, his fingers tracing the copper pathways as if reading a sacred text. He didn't say thank you. Words weren't his tool. Instead, he looked at James, the older, quiet colleague who worked alongside him, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His eyes, for a fleeting second, gleamed with something that wasn't pain. It was a tiny moment, a quiet victory no one else in the world witnessed. But for Louis, It was worth more than any quarterly profit. It was the affirmation that he was doing the right thing. Precisely 11:15, Alexander Garnier entered the store. The regional manager looked tense, trying to appear casual, but his stiff shoulders betrayed him. Theodore spotted him immediately, and his face broke into the most obsequious smile Louis had ever seen. "Alexander, what a pleasant surprise. Come to see the magic happen?" he said, extending his hand. "Just a routine audit, Theodore. Carry on as if I'm not here," Alexander replied, clearly uncomfortable. Theodore, however, saw it as an opportunity. He began guiding Alexander around the store, pointing out his successes, the efficiency of the shelves, the speed of the checkout. Shortly after, Bianca Thomas, the head of HR, walked in. She wore an impeccable pantsuit and an expression that allowed for no small talk. Now confusion was visible on Theodore's face. The regional manager's presence was one thing, but the global head of HR, "Ms. Thomas, what an honor. We weren't expecting you," he stammered. "I was in town. Mr. Garnier mentioned he'd be here and I decided to tag along," she replied coolly, offering no smile. The trap was closing. The other employees began to sense that something important was happening. They worked slower, casting curious glances at the group of executives now gathered near the entrance. The atmosphere of normalcy had evaporated, replaced by a palpable electricity, the silence before the storm. And in the midst of it all, James Silva, the invisible employee, continued to stack boxes waiting for the right moment to light the fuse. "Theodore, since we have the honor of Miss Thomas's and Mr. Garnier's presence, why don't you gather us for a quick team meeting?" Louis's voice, still as James, cut through the tense air. Everyone turned to him, surprised. A new low-level employee interrupting the executives. Theodore shot him a thunderous look. "Not now, James. I think now is the perfect time," Bianca Thomas interjected, her eyes fixed on Theodore. "A great idea. Gather everyone." Caught off guard and with no way out, Theodore reluctantly summoned the team to the center of the store. Employees emerged from the warehouse and the registers forming a semicircle. A few curious customers paused to observe. Louis positioned himself next to Miguel, who looked terrified by the sudden attention. "Theodore," Alexander Garnier said, trying to regain control, "why don't you take this opportunity to reintroduce us to your innovative inventory system? Ms. Thomas will surely be impressed." Theodore's ego ignited instantly, overriding his anxiety. This was his chance to shine. With a projector that was quickly brought over, he began displaying the project slides on a white wall. He spoke with confidence, using corporate jargon to describe the logistical synergy and efficiency paradigm he had created. He puffed up with pride, pointing at the complex diagrams. When he finished his presentation, there was an awkward silence. It was then that James raised his hand, like a student in a classroom. "It's truly brilliant, Mr. Seelig," Louis said, his voice calm and respectful. "But I'm curious. On page 7, you detail the predictive replenishment algorithm. Could you explain the logic behind the weighted seasonality variable you used? It's quite complex." Theodore's smile faltered. He looked at the slide, his eyes darting quickly over the diagram. He had no idea what James was talking about. That was the most complex part of the system, the heart of Miguel's genius, and Theodore had copied it without understanding it. "Well, it's proprietary calculation, quite technical," he stammered, trying to deflect. "Technical indeed," Louis agreed. He then gently turned to the young man beside him. "Miguel, perhaps you can help us. You understand these diagrams, don't you?" All eyes turned to Miguel. He was trembling, but as his eyes landed on the diagram projected on the wall, his creation, something shifted. Fear gave way to passion. He took a step forward, and with a voice that started hesitant but soon became firm and clear, he began to explain. He didn't just explain the variable, he dissected it. He spoke about how seasonal purchasing patterns weren't linear, and how his algorithm used historical data to predict demand spikes with 98% accuracy. He spoke with the clarity of an inventor describing his masterpiece. The store staff watched, dumbfounded. They had never heard Miguel speak so much. Alexander Garnier and Bianca Thomas exchanged a look. The truth was beginning to emerge, ugly and undeniable. Theodore was white as a ghost. His house of cards was collapsing, live, in front of everyone. The silence that followed Miguel's explanation was deafening. Thank you, Miguel. That was illuminating, Louis said. His voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of James Silva, the humble employee. It was deeper, more resonant, carrying an authority that made everyone in the room straighten up. Slowly, he removed the Autistic baseball cap and the cheap reading glasses. He ran a hand through his hair, revealing his signature cut. "My name," he said, looking directly at Theodore, "is Louis Wilson. I am the founder and CEO of this company." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Employees exchanged shocked glances. Ava Carvalho covered her mouth with her hand. Alexander Garnier looked like he was about to faint. Theodore Hassan Chelik's face went through a series of emotions: shock, denial, panic, and finally, pure terror. His color drained completely, leaving him with a deathly pallor. "But how?" he stammered. "I wanted to see the family culture you built," Louis said, his voice as sharp as glass. He pulled a small remote control from his pocket, and I must say it was quite an experience. He pressed a button. The projector, still displaying Theodore's slides, changed. The white wall now showed the security camera footage from the warehouse. The room watched in horrified silence as Theodore mocked Miguel's stimming. They watched as he cruelly berated him. And then, they watched the final scene. Theodore, with a look of contempt, sweeping Miguel's circuit board to the floor. The sound of it shattering echoed through the silent store. Murmurs of disgust spread through the crowd of employees and customers. And for the grand finale, Louis continued, now projecting the photos Theodore had taken of Miguel's notebooks, side by side with the emails where he presented the project as his own. The evidence was total. The betrayal was absolute. Bianca Thomas stepped forward, her face a mask of professional fury. "Theodore Hassan Chelik, you are terminated for cause, effective immediately, for workplace harassment, unethical conduct, and theft of intellectual property. Security will escort you from the premises. Our legal team will be in touch." Theodore opened his mouth to protest, to justify himself, but there was nowhere left to run. He looked at Louis, his eyes pleading. Louis met his gaze, his expression unyielding. He stepped closer, and in a voice low enough that only Theodore and those closest could hear, he delivered the final sentence. "You didn't just break a circuit board. You broke a trust you were never worthy of." Two uniformed security guards materialized and stood beside Theodore. They held him gently but firmly by the arms and guided him toward the exit. He passed his former colleagues who refused to look at him, some with disdain, others with shame. His walk of shame ended as he passed through the automatic glass doors, expelled from the world he had tried to build with lies. With Theodore gone, Louis turned to the staff. "As of today, Ava Carvalho is the new manager of this store." Ava looked at him, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. Muted but sincere applause began to erupt among the employees. Finally, Louis turned to Miguel, who had watched it all with a mixture of fear and astonishment. "Miguel," Louis said, his voice now gentle, "your system is genius, and geniuses don't belong in a warehouse. I'd like to offer you a position at our corporate headquarters. I want you to lead a new team, the Systems Innovation and Efficiency Division. You'll have all the resources you need to create whatever you want. What do you say?" Miguel looked at Louis, at the intact circuit board he still held in his hand, and at the faces of his colleagues. For the first time that day, a small, genuine smile formed on his lips. Weeks later, Louis Wilson's office no longer looked the same. Instead of spreadsheets, his desk was now covered with prototypes and diagrams. But the biggest change wasn't in his office. It was on the floor below. He had converted an old testing lab into a new R&D space, a sanctuary of creativity and innovation. It was Miguel Correa's new domain. The final scene isn't of a villain being taken away, but of a hero finding his place. Louis leans in the doorway of the lab, observing. The space is bright and quiet, filled with the soft hum of cutting-edge equipment and the scent of cool solder. Miguel is at a large workbench, surrounded by vintage and modern technology, engrossed in his work. He's no longer just organizing. He's creating, sketching out designs for Autistic's next revolutionary system. He looks different. His shoulders are relaxed, his posture confident. He senses Louis's presence, looks up, and offers a smile. Not a small, hesitant one, but an open, genuine smile of recognition and partnership. Lewis's gaze then drifts to a glass-enclosed shelf on the wall. Within it, like a museum piece, sits the broken circuit board. It wasn't thrown away. It was preserved. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of the day truth proved stronger than lies, and an act of cruelty inadvertently opened the doors to a bright future. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes the greatest act of leadership is to step down from the ivory tower and walk the factory floor. Someone you know might need to hear this today, to remember that true genius often flourishes in the quietest places, just waiting for someone willing to listen.